Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I continue with my New Year's resolutions today in a different amplitude, but with the same happiness to see you all. Who is that person on that photo? Well, it used to be me, but a while ago. So today, the plan for tonight is revisiting the second episode of my Chess Killer Tips podcast that I've recorded a very long time ago. Those 64 episodes were recorded from 2007 to 2009. But but in the coming month, we are going to revisit those episodes, to listen to them, and then discuss them in more details. So today is the time for episode 2. And then after that, I'm gonna probably solve a few puzzle rushes. By the way, have you watched the finals of the puzzle battle championship? Something unbelievable. I mean, those guys, they score more than 60 in 3 minutes. It's my personal best in survival mode. How they do it, I have no idea. Yes, amazing, just simply amazing. Okay, but let's first listen to Chess Killer Tips podcast episode number 2, and then analyze it in more details. So here it comes.
Welcome to Chess Killer Tips, brought to you by ChessQueen.com. Here's your host, Alexandra Kosteniuk.
This is a position from a 1737 chess book. It's white to play. Black is threatening to give checkmate on h8 and at the same time to take the rook on c5. So, what should white do? How can he win the game? You can press pause now and think about this position for as long as you need. At the end of the music, you will hear the solution. I'm back. In this position, white wins by playing rook h5. And after rook takes h5, rook a6 check, wherever the black king goes. For example, king c5, white wins after playing rook a5 check and then taking the rook on h5. This is a very nice example of enfilade.
Thanks for watching the Chess Killer Tips podcast. Send your questions and comments to Alexandra at Kosteniuk.com.
So here we go. Yes, of course. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dirk G, Chess Snoop. Enfilade, I said, and in English, I believe it's a skewer, but it's also this motif is often called desperado when one piece is dying, but it sacrifices itself in order to get. So the pieces of its army get something out of this sacrifice. A very nice example, a very simple one, and I've chosen some more studies with the same position for today. So let's get to these studies. Actually, in the Chess Killer Tips that I just showed you, it was mentioned that this study is from 1737 chess book. I don't know what book I meant, but in the studies database that I have, This study is dated with 1792 year, and the author is called Firdushi. I've never heard of this composer, but nevertheless, it's a very nice, quite a simple idea of sacrificing the rook and forcing black rook to go to the 5th rank, because black was threatening to give a checkmate, and at the same time to win the rook on c5, and that's why the rook sacrifices itself in order to prevent this checkmate, in order to save the square. And after black is taking on h5, white has this very simple but nice idea of winning this rook that is so unfortunately placed on the 5th rank now. And whenever the king goes, c5, d5, e5, the same check will follow, rook a5, with a skewer winning this rook on the next move. So a very simple but nice study. And there were many other, well, not maybe many, but there were some other studies that had been created after this initial study had been published with the same idea. And so we'll go over those studies, already knowing this motif, that our key motif of today. So that's the next one, of an unknown author of 1895. It's not known who was the composer of this position, but here we are, almost similar idea, a little bit more beautiful, since it's not, I mean, white doesn't really have material advantages in the previous puzzle, and despite the fact that black queen is on the board, white is winning anyway with this simple, nice idea of sacrificing the rook first, so taking one step back with the idea later on to take 2 steps forward. And I believe my chat knows how to solve this puzzle very well. It's basically the same idea. Not really very difficult to say what will happen now. Still giving you some seconds to write it in the chat, so I know that you are listening. Who's gonna be the first to write? Yes, Porty, Alekine. Well done. And Andy. Yes, of course, same idea. Even though there is a queen, not a rook, on the h file, and queen usually is a stronger piece, still checkmate is threatening, so white needs to first defend from being checkmated. And with this nice move, white is defending from being checkmated, and at the same time is getting ready to checkmate black, because rook a6 is a threat. And there are 2 actually possibilities. If black takes on h5, then rook a6 and rook a5 will follow, winning the queen and the game. If black plays queen f1 or queen d3, doesn't matter, trying to save the queen and protect at the same time the square on a6. Even though this square is protected, it doesn't really help black a lot, since after rook a6 check, black is obliged to take on a6, and after rook h6, similar skewer but on the 6th rank appear, and the queen is lost and the game is lost. So let's get going to our study number 3. I don't know if you solved many studies, how do you like chess composition or no, but I'm a big fan of chess composition. I like this simple studies that often show the beauty of chess. And I've solved, excuse me, I've solved thousands of those studies, and I enjoy them very much. This harmony between the pieces. Here comes another study, which will end, and of course it's a hint for you, with the same idea that we've just analyzed and discussed. It's white to move. The composer is Gorgiev, and this particular study is from 1929. So this position was composed in 1929. And compared to the two previous ones, this one, of course, is a little bit more complicated because there are several moves that need to be done in order to get the position with the idea we just discussed. Actually, I'm not even sure that this one is worked. No, it's not working. Actually, it's not working. So this study has been published, but then the mistake has been found. And this particular study is working only if black goes to d6. So a nice variation, but doesn't really work very well. Of course, if black blunders here and makes king to d6 move, we get the same position that we just discussed, but unfortunately for the author, king e6 or king f6 is giving black a draw. And so this study is not really working very well, but let's pretend that we haven't seen the first moves, the first position, and that's the position that we will discuss. It's very similar to the second one that we just analyzed. The idea is the same: rook h5, if take rook a6, rook a5, if queen e2, then rook a6, and rook h6, rook takes a6. But yes, it doesn't really work very well. Let's see this one. It's from the same author. So he probably noticed that the position that he created, the study that he created, doesn't really work very well. So but he wanted to use this idea very much. So that's what he came up with a year later. This study was created in 1930. It's white to move, and let's see how white wins here. It's a little bit, of course, more difficult than all the previous ones that we just saw, but let's try to solve it. Yes, I wish I could say the same, Portialica, and I wish I could say the same that I also just studied Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual. It's on my table, of course, but I have so many things to do that can't find always time to study it. Although it's, of course, a very good idea. Even if you've read this book, even if you solved all the puzzles there, if you feel like you know them by heart, it's always a good idea to revisit, reread, restudy. Okay, so any ideas on this one? Of course, white wants to take on c2, but unfortunately, rook takes c2 doesn't work immediately because of rook takes h8. Oh, sorry, rook h8 check, and then taken on a8, and we'll get this very interesting position: a rook and a bishop versus rook. I'm sure the Dvoretsky and game manual can tell you a lot. Actually, I've also had some streams dedicated to this topic, and if you follow my career, I've been fortunate enough to win the last game of the Russian Superfinal, women's Superfinal in December in this particular endgame, having a rook and a bishop versus rook, and thus winning the game and bronze. So a rook takes c2 doesn't work. Rook 8 to a4. Well, it's a good try. it's a good try, but unfortunately for white, it's not so clear how to proceed after king to d3. Because if we continue checking the king, it will not go to d2. It will just cover with the rook. Rook to c3. And well, your idea is very nice. Yes, I see that you are proposing the line with rook c4, bishop e5. And it's still not so clear that white is winning here. Probably they are, but it's like very, very complicated. And as I've already shown, rook c4 is not the only move. King d3 is possible. And here, unfortunately, this idea with bishop e5 doesn't work anymore. So in order to win, white needs to find the bishop to e5 move. So first, white sacrifices the bishop, and it looks like surprising. Because if you take, I mean black takes, of course. Because if black doesn't take, let's see what's gonna happen, by the way. If he goes to d5, I'm just gonna grab the rook and the h8 square is protected. What's gonna happen if black's king goes to d3? So I suppose white will just give a check. King to d2, probably another check. And after king d1, rook a1, winning the rook on h1. So black is obliged to take, but it seems, I mean, here that everything is fine. Yes, that's right, similar idea, but different move order. And actually, different move order means a lot. How often in these practical games you see the idea, but somehow you don't have patience, or you're just don't realize that there is a different move order, and this different move order makes a huge difference. So yes, that's rook a to a5 check, because again, rook takes c2 doesn't work in view of rook h8 and rook takes a8. Rook a to a5 check, and if black goes to d6, white gives a check on a6. If the king retreats from the 6th rank, white can just grab the rook. If rook c6 is played, then rook d2 and rook c2, and again the rook is lost. So almost there, but there is one trick. Black can try to defend with rook to c5. Very nice move, alas not enough to save the game. Because as we know, after rook takes c5, king to d6, we reach the position that we started with, and we know that here white is winning. And you know how. Yes, you already know how. And when you know the idea, when you recognize this pattern, like those guys who solve more than 60 puzzles in less than 3 minutes, they just know all those patterns by heart. They've solved like thousands and thousands and thousands of those puzzles, and believe me or not, even in chess, those patterns repeat themselves. So yes, you see how easy it is once you're already familiar with the same pattern. Rook h5 sacrifices the rook, and suddenly the rook is lost again. A very nice study, not so difficult one, but still with some tricks that one needs to avoid on the first move. And let's get going. Another study, but with the colors reversed. It's white to move, and of course it's very simple to notice. Actually, we've discussed the same exact position, but just with the colors reversed. Now it's white, who's playing rook to a4, and the same idea. Despite the fact that black has an extra queen and a move to make, there is nothing to do in order to save from these two threats. Rook takes a8 and rook h3. After queen takes a4, rook h3 will follow, and then winning the queen. After queen c8, rook h3 will follow, and the same idea that we've already seen. So let's proceed to another one, another puzzle, a little bit more complicated, but same idea. White to move and win. By the way, I didn't mention that this study was a study by Klink of 1849. This one, as you can see, the composer is Kohn, and this particular study was composed in 1940. White to move and win. It's white to move. Again, rook takes f4 doesn't work, so white doesn't really have a lot of moves to choose from. Yes, 2 rook versus 2 rook endgames are usually, of course, drawn, except the cases that we discuss today. Yes, white needs to start with rook h6 check. If the king goes to c7 or to the 7th rank, then white will just give another check and will win the rook and the game. So in order to try to save the game, king c5 should be made. And now again, white can take one of those rooks, but neither one works. I mean, just we get a draw after either rook takes a4 or rook takes a6. So in order to win the game, white needs to give another check on h5, and again, same story. If the king goes back to the 6th rank, we'll just grab the rook. So black should play king d4, rook takes f4, king e3, and voila, we have the same position. A little bit different position, but with the same idea, which we already seen, we know, and thus it should be easy for us to solve this one. And of course, the winning move is rook to a4. Again, the same idea of losing the rook. I mean, we're kind of obliged to lose it, but in this situation, we are forcing black into a very unfortunate situation. This desperado motif, where the rook, the piece that is already going to die, we know that for sure, it sacrifices itself in order to win the game or material or get some advantage. Rook takes a4, and again check, check, and win back the rook. Here we go. And the last one, the last study for today, is the same idea, which I found when preparing this stream, when preparing to revisit the second episode of my Chess Killer Tips podcast. It's white to move. It's a study of Alexeyev of 1981. So compared to the ones that we've already discussed, it's quite a modern study, we can say. The same idea, the same concept. There are many very beautiful ideas in chess composition. Some of them are very unrealistic, and I don't really like those. But some are quite simple, but still I enjoy them a lot. And you do see those ideas in practice, although of course not so often. Yes, a7 or b7, which rook to move? That is the question. But since black has a white squared bishop, it's a better idea for white to play, yes, to put the rooks on the black squares. And that's how they win, by giving the check on a7. Rook a7 check, king g6, rook b6 check, and very nice. I mean, rooks work together nicely. We know it from checkmate with two rooks, so similar ideas. And if the king continues his journey, it's gonna be his last move in the game, because the rooks will just checkmate the king. So in order to live a little bit longer, the bishop should sacrifice itself. And for the moment, it may seem that black saves the game, but as we already know, this double threat of giving checkmate on h1 and taking the rook at the same time does not work here very well, because of this beautiful, yes indeed, this beautiful sacrifice, rook h4. Suddenly we get the same position of the pattern of the motif that we discussed, and that was the topic for today. Hooray! So here we go, the second episode of Chess Killer Tips podcast has been revisited. I hope that you enjoyed it. And with this stream, let's carry on. I'm going to solve, as my New Year's resolution is saying, a few puzzle rushes. Yes, that's gonna be quite unpleasant to end up in this situation when playing for a weaker side. And while I'm solving my puzzle rushes, I've seen some questions how to play. As you know, some of you who watch my streams and who come often, I do play with my viewers once in a while. But I also want to run tournaments, like arena tournaments, so everyone gets a chance to play with me. And I've created the ChessQueen club on chess.com, so make sure to join it. Yes, indeed. So I think from February on, or maybe even closer to the end of January, I might be able to start organizing my arenas and tournaments. So I think soon we'll be playing an arena in this ChessQueen club. Yes, thank you everyone for your help, for your attention, and I hope to see you all tomorrow, 10 p.m. Central European Time. I will try to prepare the third episode of my Chess Killer Tips podcast with more examples on the ideas, on the main idea discussed in the podcast. And whom should I give a rate to? What channels are streaming right now? What interesting chess channels that we can recommend? Aha! Let me raid you to Elizabeth Pets, who is having her birthday today. And that's a very good moment, I think, to congratulate her on her birthday. So make sure to congratulate Elizabeth, to say hi from me, and to wish her all the best. And I hope to see you all tomorrow night. Yes, you're very welcome. Take care, play chess, as always. See you really soon. Bye bye. Au revoir, indeed. Bonne nuit.